Hi, my name is Colin Clark, and I'm the Associate Director of the Inclusive Design Research Center at OCAD University in Toronto. I'm happy to have the opportunity to speak with you today at the Artificial Intelligence for Information Access Conference. Here at the IDRC, we work to ensure that emerging policies, systems, and design practices are inclusive of the full range of human diversity and are supportive of greater access to work, cultural participation, and creative expression for all. Artificial intelligence systems are predicated upon an emerging weave of proprietary hardware, software, and data, both local and remote, that I'll refer to today as platform infrastructure, or just platforms. Increasingly, we can't separate the servers that power the clouds operated by the big Silicon Valley tech companies like Amazon, Google, and Microsoft from the specialized hardware chips that run inside our mobile devices, and from the algorithms, software, databases, and data analysis routines that are coded to run only on these platforms. Combine this with the vast and unprecedented troves of personal data required to train a system to provide sufficiently generalized results, which are then sold in the form of machine learning building blocks offered within these platforms. Artificial intelligence systems can, by and large, only be developed by becoming dependent on these stacks of interwoven technologies and technical methods provided by the platform companies. This material infrastructure, chips, servers, software, and training data, coupled with the ideology of free market capitalism's very particular construction of disruption, progress, and innovation, which are often only possible at the cost of eroding working conditions and are underpinned by the invisible human labor in warehouses and content moderation shops that make it all possible. All of this is what we point to when we invoke the term artificial intelligence. Rather than giving into my temptation to suggest these systems express anything but intelligence, that they're simply a conglomeration of computational materials that has taken on the brand of learning and intelligence, I'd like to highlight the sense in which AI systems embody particular platform logics which result from the way in which technology is designed by the big Silicon Valley tech companies. These are, it seems, increasingly at odds with values of equity, fair work, and social justice. And because of this coupling with the ideology of progress and innovation, it all ends up seeming somehow inevitable. Platforms and the language of machine learning and artificial intelligence drive a culture of inevitability. The culture of inevitability tells us that these automated decision-making systems will be designed and deployed regardless of whether we choose to engage with them or not. It's just progress. This culture tells us that saying no isn't an option, and that these infrastructures are, at heart, objective and generalizable and universal. They're just tools, and anybody can be included in them. And thus that the work ahead of us is simply to make sure that they are used more responsibly and ethically. The culture of inevitability tells us that the social practices and relations of platforms and how they're made don't need to change. Only their content does. If only we had more data about more and different kinds of people, these automated decision-making systems could be used more responsibly and ethically, they say. Over the past several years, as the result of many well-publicized cases of discriminatory decisions made by automated systems, we've seen increasingly urgent calls from scholars, activists, the public sector, and even industry itself for data gathering and machine learning training methods to be more representative. That is, to include data of and about those communities who have been most impacted by the unintended consequences. But equally, I think these consequences are by design, as I think the externalization of responsibility and thus of intentionality itself is very much a part of the logic of today's platforms. But the problem with focusing solely on representation in data-driven decision-making systems is, as Jutta Treviranus points out, that small minorities, particularly people with disabilities and communities whose difference places them outside the normative center with its unambiguous categories and classifications, these communities will always be understood by conventional statistical algorithms and machine learning training regimes as outliers, as noise within the system. Outliers which, according to the current way of things, must be quantized into the more recognizable clusters and categories which, of course, don't meaningfully serve them, or otherwise must simply be erased or excluded from the data analysis entirely. Uniqueness and difference in platform logic is a kind of error representing the impossibility of systemic representation. And at the same time, greater representation in data is no solution for those communities who have long been the focus of technologies deployed by the police and state to monitor, measure, and surveil them, what Ruha Benjamin calls the new Jim Code, platform technologies that disproportionately target Black, immigrant, and racialized communities as all-inclusive subjects and thus suspects in a data regime of criminalization. Representative inclusion in light of such systems obviously can't unilaterally be our goal. We need the possibility also of refusal, of not being included at all. Representation is important, of course. We need policy and legislation that ensures that the platform companies and developers of AI technologies are accountable for their systems' unintended and by design social consequences, and that these systems are inclusive of the voices and perspective of diverse communities. But I'd also like to suggest that a deeper form of representation is also needed. Not simply representation in or out of data, but representation in decision-making. That is, ownership and direct governance of platform technologies by those who are most impacted by their effects. Technology's culture of inevitability is also one of perpetual novelty. We're told that we've never seen anything like this before, that the old ways of making decisions don't work anymore, and that only new and disruptive models will fix our problems. Often, this simply translates as platforms applying their own opaque policies at will, largely unfettered by external oversight and regulation. In contrast, over the past several years, I've been fortunate to being introduced to and begun working with a global community of worker-owned cooperatives, unions, scholars, and grassroots organizers who have been developing their own cooperative platform technology alternatives. I've seen the creativity and ingenuity of workers designing new ways of working and preserving old ways that are fairer, more democratic, more flexible, and which give back more to their communities. Yet the companies that control our digital platforms today will invariably tell us that collective ownership and decision-making is impractical, inefficient, and impossible to scale. In our CFAR-funded project, Cooperative Data Communities, an international group of practitioners are working to investigate and share the ways that cooperative governance and worker ownership can help to address the systemic inequities of artificial intelligence and data platforms. Our partner on this project, the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, is the world's largest federation of women-owned cooperatives in the world, operating at a scale and quality of economic impact that the platform companies can't compare to, with over 1.5 million women worker owners currently. Since 1972, they've effectively and efficiently built, grown, and governed their own cooperative enterprises while working to support greater food, income, and social security for their members and their communities. It's clear that policymakers and technologists have much to learn from the ways of SEVA and other established grassroots communities and how they organize themselves and make decisions. They provide a viable, scalable example for how equitable, democratic decision-making can impact communities, one which I think is deeply relevant in the context of large-scale platforms and emerging artificial intelligence technologies. To this end, our project is creating a toolkit that documents a variety of community-led design practices, cooperative governance approaches, and sustainable business models and case studies. We're also developing open source tools that will support SEVA's agricultural cooperatives and eventually other cooperatives worldwide in building their own data and AI infrastructure to help them better predict market prices and share resources among members, for example. Our approach draws on the ways we've learned to design with communities here at the IDRC, as described in our community-led co-design kit, where those with lived experience lead and sustain the design process throughout. We invite you to join us in this effort. As a designer, it's increasingly clear to me that what we make is indivisible from how we make it and with whom. This is why I feel it's important to include and engage the wisdom and experience of cooperatives and other successful grassroots organizations, how they organize themselves, how they make decisions, and how they balance the need for individual benefit while growing healthy and sustainable communities around their work. Building alternatives to today's platforms that reflect this kind of reciprocity, inclusion, and sustainability won't be easy. It will require solidarity and creativity amongst justice-seeking groups, the public sector, grassroots communities, and the designers and developers of community-based platforms. To get involved in our effort, please visit the Inclusive Design Research website or send me an email. Thanks very much for listening today, and I hope to have the opportunity to speak with you later in the conference. Bye.